Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the show. On this episode, I'm exploring a subject I've been wanting to cover for some time, and that's luck. The problem was I couldn't find the right person to talk about it, and luckily enough I now have, because the person I'm speaking to is Dr. Chengwei Liu. He's an Associate Professor of Strategy and Behavioural Science at Imperial College London. And Chengwei's work challenges some of the most fundamental assumptions we have about success, fairness, and what it really takes to get ahead. He's written an entire book on luck, and so he's ideally placed to guide us through it. In our discussion, we dive into why so much of what we attribute to skill is actually driven by luck, how we can better navigate randomness and uncertainty, and how understanding these dynamics can shape everything from businesses to societies and our personal decision-making. We'll explore the difference between luck and serendipity, why some predictions about the future aren't all they seem, and how to develop what Chengwei calls smart contrarian thinking. That's the kind that helps you stand out in a world that often values conformity over genuine insight. So if you've ever wondered how much of your success is actually down to you, and how much is just a case of being in the right place at the right time, you are in for an absolute treat, as indeed you are if you haven't ever wondered that. This is a really thought-provoking episode. I think you are going to find this fascinating because I know I did. It's my discussion with Dr. Chengwei Liu on luck and serendipity. Chengwei, welcome to the Human Risk Podcast.
Thank you, Christian, for inviting me.
I'm really thrilled to have you here, and I would say that it was a matter of luck that I came across your post talking about a book that I wasn't aware you'd written, but as soon as I saw you had, I wanted to find out more. But before we get on to talking about the subject of luck, tell my listeners a little bit about your areas of research and what you do.
Yeah, of course. So I'm currently a professor of strategy and behavioral science at Imperial College London. So I was trained at Cambridge. And I studied my research studying strategy, right? So how firms can be more successful than others. I was a management consultant. I already from Taiwan and working in Singapore for some while. And then I did my PhD. But there's an interesting observation I made during my early PhD time that a lot of people focus on this, how to make firms more successful by developing and resources, capability, or choosing the right battlefield or industry, right? But there's one research called the performance decomposition analysis. So how much variance can be attributed to the industry you're in, and how much variances can be attributed to the firm effect, including the leadership. There's one observation attracted my attention because the sum of the variances of these factors, the systematic factor about the industry and the firms, ended up less than 50% across different type of research. There's always a category. Usually they just put it like the unexplained variance. It's more than 50%. So basically the implication is that, well, anything you read on the strategy gurus writing, the textbook, at best, explain 50% of the thing you do. And the rest is really about being at the right place at the right time. But I was frustrated that in strategy, the scores, no one talk about it. Few talk about it, but not mainstream at all. But think about the proportion of the impact, that's a huge. And on the other hand, if you underestimate the impact of that randomness, being at the right place at the right time, you almost by definition, you have the illusion of control, right? You believe your strategy, your effort, or your skill, and the talent you recruited can help to achieve your goal. But this is a simplification, but you can say 50% of the time you'll get disappointed, right? So you're not going to get what you want to achieve. So that's kind of inspiration. I mean, okay, so I want to be slightly contrarian when everyone else is doing like this kind of resource and capabilities. I want to do something unpack this overlooked aspect of business performance. So that's kind of what triggered my research. Of course, this was a very difficult journey because when people do different things, there's a lot of pushback, a lot of skepticism, and myself have the self-doubts as well. So how can I study something that cannot either be defined or measured clearly? But fortunately, I was lucky enough. I had a lot of support, my mentor, my advisors. in the past 10, now it's almost 15 years. I wrote a book on luck, as Christian, you recognize. I do find some way how to conceptualize luck more reliably and how to empirically measure luck, and finally how to strategize with luck.
I love this. I absolutely love this. And I love it both for the sort of the very human nature of it, because if we're honest, if we really thought about stuff, we recognize just intuitively what you're talking about. But I love the idea that you're debugging all of these books that tell you how these amazing strategy gurus and people on LinkedIn telling you to do stuff. I love the fact that there's another way to look at the world. But I guess the first question is, so how do we define luck? We all know what it is, but how do you define it?
Yeah, this is where I draw a lot of insight knowledge from the philosopher, right? So they really think about luck for a long time. They may not use the phrase luck. They can say like a randomness or chance. And that is probably the more precise way of thinking about it, because the world is more random than we think. And the driving force sometimes is so complex or interdependent that we don't know what's going on. And the luck is really about the perception. So when something happen beyond our foresight and control, then people attribute that to luck, depending on the consequence, right? Sometimes good luck and sometimes bad luck. So this beyond your foresight and control, that is really the better definition of luck. And of course, we hear a lot of conventional wisdom, right? So if you work harder, you get luckier, or a chance to really prepare mind. I think this can be considered motivational, but if you really follow the definition of luck or chance is something beyond your control and foresight, then this type of conventional wisdom may be problematic, because if there's really a systematic causal relationship, if you work harder, then you got more positive outcome, or chance to really prepare mind leading to more serendipitous finding, then this causal relationship basically suggests that is systematic. That is not totally random, right? So I think that that area, of course, is more tricky and difficult to define. That is my current research is about as well. But to answer your question, I think beyond our foresight or beyond our accountability, that's a really important or essential when people talk about luck.
And of course, one of the challenges is it feels unfair. And so we have this innate sense that the world ought to be fair. And it's kind of what we're taught as we're growing up, right? The sort of the way the world operates is that bad things will happen to bad people, good things will happen to good people, and therefore the system should sort of work in the way that it's preordained. And we know, unfortunately, we discover to our cost that that's not the way the world operates. So I guess one of the challenges is that by suggesting what you're suggesting and the focus of your research, you're kind of undermining a basis that we all like to think the world operates under, which is fairness.
Exactly. And Christian, you already highlighted people do not always get what they deserve, right? Whether they do some good thing and do not get a credit, or they do some evil thing or bad thing, but they get away with it. And I think there's a line of research I really like. It's called the belief in a just world. And that's really related to what you just said, Christian. And one of the things related, from that research is that, people evolutionarily kind of formulate this type of belief. It's very strong in our cognitive system, even it can be coupled with reality a lot. But that perception actually can lead to a huge consequence. Like one of the studies from that literature compared the US and the EU system. Because if sufficient number of citizens or parties believe strongly about this, the world is just, luck doesn't make a huge impact, then it suggests that, the redistribution policy will be different, right? In the US, of course, the tax in general is lower, and there's fewer social security protection compared to like EU or France and Germany in particular, that the tax is higher because they believe a lot of the wealth you created actually should be attributed to the nurturing system you're in. It's not necessarily attributed to the individual, right? So a lot of the wealth you earn, you should take a higher tax, impose a higher tax rate on that, and then contribute back to the society. And also applies to the underperforming, right? The poorer people. Probably they did not deserve all this kind of a shame or whatever. The social security is stronger than the EU than in the US. And this can, of course, also create this very unfortunate reinforcing mechanism, because if you are unfortunately born in the US, but with the low socioeconomic status, then your life becomes very fragile. Even you're very talented, but you cannot disapprove the people in that system who believe in a just world, because they will just attribute all your kind of failures to you and your lack of talent and lack of effort, right? But we heard a lot of stories saying that, well, if you're in that kind of system, just like a minor accident, then the life of your family can be ruined. You're in debt. You cannot finish your study. And then basically it's like a black hole kind of keeping you or trapping you. You cannot get out from that. So yeah, what you said, Christian, I wrote about in my book, that is have why luck or perception of luck or misperception of luck can have huge consequences, not just for business, but at a societal level as well.
And you explain very clearly in the book, and I'd love you to explain now, this idea of confusing skill and it's very easy for us to confuse skill and luck. And I'll admit, it's only been recently where I've kind of been able to acknowledge my own privilege and the sorts of things that, just happened to be the sort of education I had. And I always convinced myself that I'd gone to a top university because I was amazing and incredibly intelligent and very well deserving. And it's taken me decades to get my head right. And even though I'm sort of attuned to some of the behavioral stuff, it's taken me a long time. So this is ingrained in all of us, this idea that, that skill is more important than luck. And it's a real challenge, I guess, to deal with it. But to your point, causes, every single one of us, I think at some point has made that misattribution.
Yeah, absolutely. Including myself, human being, I think we're very motivated to have this self-serving attribution bias, right? Psychology called that. It's really fundamental that we tend to attribute all the successes we have to ourselves. It's our effort, it's our skill, it's our talent, rather than being at the right place at the right time or born in the right family, right? Because that's kind of shape our identity and confidence and all sort of things. Compared to if you, really had a self-doubt, right? You always have this imposter syndrome related to that. I mean, all the achievement, probably just get lucky or what else, other factor. Then, of course, you appear to be underconfident. And our society or our environment actually not encouraging that, because you consider consultant. I was a consultant, right? So when you sell or kind of engage your potential clients, and client, of course, can be biased. So they may not tell which consultant or which project or which offer is more viable. Then they may use confidence as an indicator of the underlying quality. So the one to appear to be more confident, if not overconfident, tend to get a deal. So of course that kind of reinforce when they attribute all this outcome, they will attribute more to themselves as well, and that is kind of self-reinforcing. So that's a pretty unfortunate. Well, from my own experience, well, that's kind of the personal motivation why I studied this topic about luck, because I saw a lot of bad decisions being made from the client side, for example, but against our advice, but still they become very, very successful and attribute all the success to themselves. And we knew from day one that was a terrible decision. Actually, this brings me to another very interesting definition of luck I like a lot, the counterfactual. So psychology actually uses to define the perceptions of luck very clearly. So like near miss. So why near miss or near escape, this kind of scenario we tend to attribute to good luck? Because it's the difference between what happened in the realized world. It can be so different from a nearby or close possible world, right? So the fact that you escape in this realized world, but you can easily imagine that in many similar or even almost identical counterfactual world, you die, you did not make it. And that difference leads to the perception of luck. And in my case is that I knew all the information, all the client, their options, and I knew any decision other than the one chosen by the client would lead to better outcome. But the reality was that actually the choice by the client led to but that's the outcome against our advice. And we kind of analytically knew that is really unlikely. But that is also a matter of luck, right? So unlikely Black Swan event can, of course, sometimes happen, then defying all this prediction.
But what I find really interesting is we're perfectly in that sort of perfect narrative, right? When we succeed, it's down to us. And when we fail, it's down to either other people, right, or bad luck.
Yeah.
So we have this ability to accept luck as a thing. We'll use it as a convenient excuse when it suits us and sort of shy away from it when it doesn't. And I find it interesting that we're very skewed in that way. So it's not that we don't recognize luck exists. We just tend to deploy
Very
it when the narrative suits us.
Yeah, exactly. Very strategically use luck as an explanation in our advantage, right? And I think related to the identity perspective, in my PhD dissertation, actually, I found a very interesting difference between managers and entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs, in making all this luck attribution. So the manager I surveyed, they actually did not acknowledge the impact of luck, much less so than those entrepreneurs. An entrepreneur in the survey question and also in the and open-ended question, they acknowledge the role of randomness and luck in their success compared to the manager. And I think it's related to the identity, right? So manager in many ways is supposed to control things, make everything, eliminate surprise, eliminate all this unreliability. So of course, the impact of luck or randomness is against that ideology. So manager cannot to acknowledge that more, and acknowledge that actually in luck or randomness impact your performance actually can kind of challenge their own competence, right? It's like you don't have the sufficient skill to make everything under your control or eliminate all the unreliability. Compared to entrepreneurs, they acknowledge like the early luck, particularly because they study all this, they have this brilliant idea, but they cannot commercialize that, but happen to meet someone and gave them this pathway to being very successful. They mention that a lot, but probably because they're successful, so they're more psychologically feel the psychological safety to share. Actually, the success is not entirely due to them, but also due to this luck factor. So I found that difference is pretty interesting.
I guess actually, yeah, if your job title is manager, you're there to manage things.
Yes.
And by default, if you're not, if there's bits of it you're not covering, that's a gap. Whereas entrepreneur, it implies playing around a bit more, experimentation, and therefore actually you can then that's really interesting. So how did you tell us a little bit about how did you go? So you've got this idea that you want to research this, right? Because you're fascinated because you've discovered the significance of this dynamic, right? How do you even start to get a handle on researching this?
Yeah. That was a very random process, as you can say. My advisor is a hardcore ethnographer, so really use with observational data, case study, details to do research. So I appreciate the intellectual freedom he gave me. Initially, of course, I follow my approach. Even he's not entirely sure this topic about luck is viable for clear irritation. But how his approach? That's when I talk to a lot of manager and entrepreneurs, the interviews, and also follow up with the survey to see if there's any differences among them. But soon I realized all these stories and narrative I collected, particularly from the entrepreneurs, they did not promise like sufficient theoretical contribution for a PhD thesis. Basically, the plain language is that people will say, okay, another fascinating story about luck. But so what? We already knew that. I mean, there's a lot of fascinating story about luck in scientific discovery, in business, happening all the time. I thought, what's new here? I cannot answer that. So during the second year of my PhD, I kind of switched to a different methodology. I engaged like a mathematical and simulation model, because that is a more precise way to define the distribution of randomness, right? And when the outcome kind of surprises. So that's related to this, the Black Swan event, right? So one of the research, of course, that we develop is that if someone successfully predict the Black Swan event, actually indicate their prediction skill is poorer than those who fail to predict the Black Swan.
Just unpick that with that, because that's counterintuitive, right? Just go through that slowly again. That's wow.
Yeah. But then, of course, if you think about this distribution or the likelihood, then you realize, hey, of course, that should be the case, because Black Swan event, by definition, is low probability event, unlikely to happen. And if you're a good forecaster, second, you should use an analytical approach and predict there's low probability that it's not going to happen in most possible world, right? And usually, those who predict successfully this Black Swan event are the poorer forecaster overreacting to weak signals. And they predict a lot of unlikely things to happen. Of course, most of the time, they will get it wrong. But if conditional upon someone successfully predict the Black Swan event, like back in 2016, if someone told you Brexit will happen for sure, Trump will win the US presidential election back in 2016, and some unknown virus will kind of destroy everything and make everyone stay at home for 2 years, in 4 years later. Of course, with the benefit of hindsight, we knew these are correct forecasts, correct prediction. But if someone made those predictions back in 2016, of course, they should not be good forecasters. They just made all this crazy prediction. Most of them are wrong, and 3 of them happen to be successful. So, who are you going to bet money with for the future prediction? I would say you should not trust all those people who successfully predict the Black Swan.
I love that. So without wishing to critique, but this is the equivalent of if you get like I don't know, this is like monkeys in front of keyboards. Eventually someone will produce the works of Shakespeare, right? Or an animal throws a dart or does something randomly it's never done before, gets lucky, and so you're. So I love this idea because these people are heralded as great foresight, blah blah blah, and you're basically saying they're not, right? We should. So they might have got that right, but we shouldn't trust them again because clearly the methodology that's got them means that they're not the experts they held out to be. That's really it makes so much. It's counterintuitive, but it makes much sense when you point it out that way. That's kind of terrifying in a way because we do look to that and go, well, they were right about this, and that's how people make careers, right? I called the crisis or whatever it was before it happened, therefore you should listen to me. And I love the fact that you're going, well, actually, is that correct? Probably not.
Absolutely, and that's related to one of the very damaging biases humans have, right? Hindsight bias. Because before the fact, of course, many things can happen, many different possibilities, right? But after we know what happened, the hindsight bias, we will have this perception we knew it all along. And of course, all this, lucky forecaster who predicted this Black Swan, they will come out with all this rationale why they were right all the time, or all along. But and the media, of course, doesn't help, right? The media will interview them as if they're the new guru and asking them all sort of questions. But that, again, is kind of exploiting the human biases, right? We love, of course, to pay attention to this super successful. We believe they must have done something that deserve all this success, attention, and so on and so forth. And then they will tell us additional stories to convince us why they're so great. And that is really detrimental.
And I love it because I always think about this in the context of sort of like autobiographies, where it's kind of like the secret of my success type thing. And then people talk all about what's made them successful. And you kind of think, well, that's interesting. Therefore, we should follow these patterns because these people know what they're doing. But of course, if you failed, you don't get to write the book. So by default, we're looking at a subset. It's a sort of ridiculous criteria. Okay? And so I love this. Like what you're doing here is you're kind of pulling the rug from under us with this thinking because it does the basis of so many decisions and the way we look at the world is as you point out, it's just flawed. And yet we're all pre-programmed to do that. It's kind of fascinating. As you were doing the research, were you like conscious of like, whoa, I'm messing with some very commonly held beliefs here?
And yeah, I would like to think so. I want to challenge some of the conventional wisdom, but I want to take one step back. A lot of biases we're talking about here, exactly like what Christian you highlighted, like this super successful, the entrepreneur, for example, the autobiography, right? All this great success, great people, and we believe they must have done something right. But in our world with globalization and all the social media, the augmenting mechanism, this is really the danger zone because this is where our intuition, gut feeling, system one thinking is like to go wrong. And before, like if you imagine what happened to our ancestor 1,000 years ago, if not million years ago, if you observe someone very successful in your tribe, probably you should select them as a leader, follow whatever they did. They probably are the best hunters. Following them and learn from their skill, that is really good. But what my mathematical model always suggests that when you have a very strong reinforcing mechanism or selection bias, like you said, we focus on the very handful, kind of super successful, and forget about the rest. And this is really mistaking luck for skill. Is can be very consequential. So let me give you an example. That is a fun example I love to use. So there are three bestsellers in management: In Search of Excellence in the 1980s, Good to Great in early 2000, and then Good to Great by Jim Collins. He had a sequel called Build to Last. These are three bestsellers in management in the past, almost 40, 50 years. One of the formula they have, of course, is selecting the most successful companies in their time. Usually it's about 20 of them, and analyzing what's their practices, and then they frame their shared practices as the best practices. If you follow those best practices, copy them, incorporate them in the company, then you can aspire to move from good to great. What happened to those firms, you may ask? Or no one asked, but I did. Chat for you. So about these three books, there are about 50 firms analyzed by this author in these three books. 1/3 of them went bankrupted within 5 years of the publication of the book. And the rest of the companies, their aggregate performance underperformed even the index fund, like the S&P 500. So what happened after greatness is regression downward, not just to the mean, it's to below mediocrity. So this is how this selecting on the most successful, learning from the successful is so dangerous. But people do that all the time because you continue finding bestseller in the airport book stores with this type of books, right? They try to sell you doing this, doing that, and you can be very, very successful, but that can be very misleading, of course.
And you've reminded me, there's a similar dynamic with like the Forbes 30 under 30, I think it is, where it's things like Theranos and like there's a large percentage of them where this is the things blown up for ethical and all sorts of other reasons, right? So this is not just related to those sorts of books. There's a broader dynamic, and I think this is absolutely fascinating. Okay, so how does the research then conclude? You started to get your data sets together. How do you? My mind is still racing with all the things that you've just done. The world is not the way I thought it was, but I love these sorts of conversations. But talk to us about the completion of the research and what you sort of did with it then.
Well, actually, we can follow up with the example we just gave, right? Because that is another type of research I'm thinking about doing. But the sample size limit that. But the Forbes 30 under 30 is a very good illustration, right? Or very unfortunate illustration, because it's almost give a guide about finding the next thought. Well, Elizabeth calls always a famous entrepreneur during their time, and then turn out it's too good to be true. So I think when I communicate this to broader audiences, a lot of my research had this feature. It's about the heuristic of too good to be true. So when you observe this exceptional success, our intuition suggests they are great, but we should really step back and be more critical. This can be too good to be true. So one of the model, of course, is about linking to this dependent variable risk taking, right? So you can think about Enron, or even more earlier is like this rock trader called Leeson, who kind of collapsed the Barry Bank. They're one of the oldest bank in the world in the UK, right? But he was based in Singapore. What happened, of course, initially he probably took some excessive risk and got lucky and got a lot of money, a lot of bonuses. How do you sustain that level of success when the initial success is really about luck? Well, by definition, we already mentioned luck is something beyond your controls. You cannot replicate your success by effort or skill. So that actually creates a very natural motivation to fraud or cheating, right? Or some company called creative accounting, like the case of Enron. So you can actually link to this mistaking love for skill and the social pressure, or this kind of identity crisis that you need to continue to be successful to kind of entertain everyone and already focus so much on you. That actually create a very strong incentive to do all this cheating and crazy things. And the Forbes 30 and under 30 kind of is that, right? You're already on the list, and you receive a lot of media attention, and then you already tell the world you will continue creating all these great things, but are you really able to? No. And that can be very unfortunate. So yeah.
I love that. And I love the sort of the contrarian indicator that's there, right? So to your point, it does serve a useful purpose. It's not intended, right? But I mean, the way you talk about these things, what I think is really interesting is this presumption of replicability. And it makes me laugh because it's sort of, I always think back to the replication crisis in the social sciences, which sitting outside academia, I don't understand because I get that it's awkward. You go, well, this happened, or did it, right? And then we want it to be able to happen again to prove that this is a thing. It's called a crisis because it doesn't replicate. And I sort of sit there and go, I'm not surprised, like as a non-academic, I'm not surprised stuff doesn't replicate, particularly where you're looking at a very artificial construct. And we've got some people in a lab and we managed to persuade some students in a lab to behave in a particular way. And then that doesn't somehow replicate with other students in the lab, let alone in the real world. I'm not surprised by this, but there is an underlying presumption that sort of everything ought to be codifiable and replicable. And therefore, that's what's kind of underpinning all of this. Here's the blueprint that you need to follow to do things. It's kind of bringing in, I guess it's sort of trying to apply, for example, the laws of physics, right? Things that are constant into a world that has random elements.
Yeah, absolutely. You highlight several important factors already, right? I think social science, unfortunately, always have this physicist envy. So that's going on for more than 200 years, right? Because a lot of great scientific progress, industrial revolution come from natural science, physics, and all this adjacent area in natural sciences are really the driver, right? In the physical world, actually, this replication and progress of science go hand in hand. That is how you can get reliable knowledge, causal relationship in particular, then you can progress from there. That's how we get to the moon. That is really important. But social science, as you suggested, that is much more random and unpredictable, or sometimes just our ignorance. So we in theory, probably we can go down to neural level, for example, or atom level, for example, to predict social behavior. Some people still believe that can be the case. But we are not there yet. So we need to use a lot of proxy, a lot of mechanism to predict what's going to happen and to simplify all this social interaction. That made all this prediction, replication so difficult to achieve. So a lot of people argue we should have a different standard, right? That's where qualitative research, as the interpretism comes in. Then in social world, we should take a very different approach compared to physics or natural science in general. But linked to my research, I think the incentive or motivation to publish also play a role why a lot of the studies fail to replicate, because it's a publish or perish world. Even many people are not in academia. You probably heard about this phrase, is that you need to publish the study in top tier journals, and then your peer then will recognize your contribution. They can get tenure, you can promote it to professor, all the things, the important status to achieve in academia, right? But these publications then play a very important role. When they play a very important role in promotion, then how do you publish? Usually in many academic journals, they publish surprising results, right? Surprisingly, it's supported by data. So based on this too good to be true heuristic, is that the more surprising the result is, or more counterintuitive result is, usually says that it's something fishy over there, not necessarily intentional, but sometimes just like this unreliable or flawed research practices, right? Like before, it's like a p-hacking. You only report the result that happen to be significant and do not kind of report all the result not significant. Or you just fine-tune the experimental design, so you're more likely to generate results that support your hypothesis. So always related to the incentive that you need to publish to survive, and how to publish is generate this as surprising results, and to continue doing that. So yeah, that's why in social science now we have an identity crisis as well. So because a lot of things, if we produce, they not be replicated. What are we doing? That's all our hook. We keep on doing, and then you realize half of the thing we do there it's not really knowledge. It's just like a random results.
What you've pointed to is the link between sort of luck and surprise, right? Stuff that we weren't expecting to have happen, when I think about that, so on the one hand, we don't like it, right? Because it poses risk to us. On the other hand, there's a human pleasure, right? We like getting surprises, right? Nice surprises. So it's what grabs our attention. So it's a very human thing to have unexpected things happen to us. And we like the ones that are, like a surprise present or a pleasantly surprised visitor, or I don't know, we win the lottery or something, right? Pleasant surprises that we weren't predicting is seen as a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of my current research. It's really about the variances, right? So you have the expectation, and surprise is really when that outcome deviate from this expectation, right? And you're absolutely right. Some of the deviation is very good when it happened to be on the upside, right? Like a pleasant surprise, you meet some old friend you haven't encountered for years, then you have a pleasant conversation or whatsoever, or you're the publisher or you're in entertainment business, you sign a new actor or a new author, you have no hope, and then suddenly become a bestseller. Think about Harry Potter for Bloomsburg, right? And suddenly kind of is the game changer in the industry. That is the pleasant surprise. But of course, deviation can go the other way. So in many cases, all this downside, the disaster. For example, in the literature, they study the nuclear plant disaster, right? So this is really unpleasant surprise. No one expected, but it still happened. And of course, in the context of like operation, variance in general is not welcome. You don't want any surprise when you produce it as a product. Then you want to have minimal variances, right? So it really depends on your context, and variance can sometimes be good, sometimes be bad, or can be just bad in general. But the other thing more about perception is about curiosity. Actually, surprise and curiosity is my current focus. One of the important takeaways is that moderate surprise is the best, because that will trigger your curiosity. You want to learn more. Why this happened? Why that deviate from your expectation? If the surprise is too much, then you'll just be overwhelmed. And it's, of course, a very low deviation. Then you have no surprise. You just continue the course of action, right? It's somehow when you have the moderate level of surprise, that really trigger the possibility of curiosity. You want to learn more, and that is where the new knowledge or new information comes into the system. Then that is really beneficial. So that is my research project there. The general label is serendipity, right? So how do you kind of engineer your choice architecture to allow more serendipitous or curiosity opportunity to happen?
And is there a difference between luck and serendipity?
Sure. In the literature, of course, the luck, like I define, is more like a factor beyond your control and foresight, play an important role in generating the outcome you care about, right? Either it's good or bad. Serendipity highlights the agency. So it's not about pure chance. It's really about when you have some skill or capability, or you learn from your experiences in a different way that enable you to see what others fail to see. So the role of agency is really important. But that's still mysterious, right? Because again, in the history of research about serendipity, we also have a very strong selection bias. We only hear about the stories about like Fleming found this penicillin, excellent discovery. But what about all this other discovery he made? Well, no one talk about those failures, right? So that is something for a researcher that is very challenging, because once you only have this samples about success, then you only have a part of the story, right? So anything you draw from the successful story can be biased. It's not really real knowledge, or it can be knowledge, but with very strong boundary condition, you cannot generalize.
And I think I know where you're going to go with the answer, but it would be remiss of me not to ask you on behalf of listeners about how do we take advantage of serendipity? How do we make what, I guess, before having this conversation, I would have described as make myself more lucky, but I guess open myself up to serendipity.
Yeah, I'll have two answers for you. One is more traditional, or people have been talking about that. I'm definitely not the first one. Serendipity, because this role of agency is important, right? So you can kind of consider how much this agency is about. So on the baseline level is that you need to do something. Your luck happen to everyone, but of course, if you just sit at home all day, doing nothing, then of course it's less likely something surprising will happen to you. So you need to do something, gaining some experiences. That is the first step to generate more opportunity for serendipitous finding, right? But the second step is that probably you need to strike the right network. So sometimes, of course, when we look for information or look for opportunity, we tend to have this bias about homophily. So we only talk to people more similar to us. But if you really think about serendipity, that is contradictory because serendipity requires you to talk to someone, for example, that you haven't been in contact with, say, 6 months. That weak tie or weak link, insecret link, is more likely to have non-redundant information compared with you. That is really likely, more likely to enable you to find something surprise to you compared to following our intuition. I mean, just talk to family member, close friend, right? You need to engage your longer or longer tie. But the third thing I think is the most valuable, not just in business, but life in general, is that if you want to have this serendipitous finding, stop looking outside or outward, looking inward. So everyone is different, right? So a lot of serendipitous findings really related to the unique life experiences, your identity, what defines you. And then based on that, to make interesting, unexpected connection to the world. Because if you just similar to everyone around you, you're not going to find anything really surprising or can be, say, commercialized. You need to really focus on what differentiates yourself in the first place, and then try to explore serendipitous opportunity from them. And that is also the advice I gave to many students or potential entrepreneurs, right? Look inward instead of outward. Do not just follow the trend or jump on the bandwagon. Whatever is popular out there, you should be a smart contrarian, just thinking about what unique feature you have, the experiences, the heuristic, the toolbox you accumulated. Based on that, and formulate opportunity that is only you can monopolize, but not others. And that would be three things you can think about the agency role in making your own serendipities.
I love that, particularly in the context of AI coming in and what are humans going to be doing? And so as a company of one, I have this sort of dilemma. So how do I, how do I protect my business? How do I make my business unique? And so I'm doubling down on what can I bring that no one else can bring? Yeah. But it occurs to me that there's a connection there to, say, artists, right? If your paintings look like everybody else's or your music sounds like everybody else's, then it doesn't stand out, right? And so I think this obsession with, and it always astonishes me when I look at sort of publishers, for example, who kind of, one of the questions you get asked by a publisher is, and you'll know this, right? Is this sort of like, who's done this before? And they're desperate for like they want to replicate the hits of before. And the music industry, same thing, right? Let's just have another version of the same thing. Or movies, we get these sort of, let's roll out the franchise. And so I love this idea of just kind of going, okay, I can see the logic behind it, but actually it makes for a more interesting world. It's almost like nature is pointing us in that direction to go, because otherwise we all just conform and it becomes really dull. And so I love it. So there's something really joyful in what you've said.
Yeah, absolutely. What I said, particularly the last part about serendipity, about uniqueness and inward, that's increasingly important in the age of AI, right? And because a lot of things will become more similar or homogeneous. So how do human being can complement what AI can produce that actually require a human to think in a very different way compared to the machine or the algorithm, or you can think about machine learning, right? That's if you're thinking about prediction based on past data, well, machine will definitely do much better than human and faster. That is no doubt or uncertainty in that question anymore. But the human can learn from experience in a very different way compared to the machine. Like this curiosity-driven learning we just talked about, and also contrarian way of thinking about this coding experiences. That will be the main advantage. Well, humans can still play a role in the age of AI. That will be very, very important.
Recognizing that there are certain situations, particularly where we're talking the physical world, where this would be a really bad idea. But you're almost pointing towards, it's almost worth deliberately trying the opposite, right? This contrarian thinking. So, don't do things that are obviously going to kill you, right? That's not a smart. Let's not mix water and electricity to see what happens because nobody else has done it, right? That's not a good idea. But there's something quite refreshing here about saying, which points me to a sort of back to being the children, where we disapply, we don't know the rules. We haven't been taught some of these things. And so we make impossible drawings, we do crazy things, we do things that go against norms because we haven't learned the norms yet. We're kind of encouraging that in adults to an extent.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right? I mean, well, I have a 5-year-old boy, so I totally know what we're talking about, trying the limit against the norm, whatever. But what we also know is that in developmental psychology, this type of learning or socialization can happen very fast, probably in the year of 7 or 8. Then they learn all the relevant norm, they contact, then they really follow the rule, and many of this uniqueness in the human being or whatever is diminished as a population or as a group, right? And that is that's not a good thing. If you really think about in the age of AI, human creativity, curiosity will become more important. You need more people to think outside the box to complement what AI cannot achieve yet. That is crucial. But how do we encourage that in the education system? That is, well, I don't think there's a good answer yet, but that's definitely deserve a lot of our attention to think about. But also you can think about that in a different way. So while sometimes when I teach the subject of luck, I got a little bit frustrated to continue telling people that, yes, there's a lot of biases. You can easily mistake luck for skill. So how about changing the framing as a teacher that is contrarian also? So yes, people outside this classroom, they mistake luck for skill all the time. And now you have some knowledge. How do you manage this or exploit this knowledge asymmetry? How do you basically make money out of all those mistakes? So let me give you the concrete example I include in my book. So how do you enhance your winning or payoff for a fair lottery game? Yeah. So of course, in most of the time, the MBA student will come up with idea that let's coordinate and buy all the tickets, all the possible combinations of number, right? Then I remind them, well, if there's fair lottery game, most likely the expected payoff is 0, if not negative. If you consider the logistic, the admin fee. So if you're rational, you should walk away from this game with a negative expected payoff, right? You should not play the wrong game. Choose the game very strategically. So the full question I ask is that, can you enhance your chance of winning or increase your expected payoff for a fair lottery game if you have to play? Life is not fair, right? Sometimes we do need to do something that you know is very unfair, or some other incumbent have a lot of financial resources. You as an underdog, or David need to fight the Goliath. So here's my tip. If you need to play this game, always pick numbers greater than 31. And this,
Because most people don't pick them.
yes, 100%, Christian. You already got the intuition. And this is supported by data in the Dutch lottery choice behavior. A fair lottery game suggests that the number between, say, 1 to 48, the distribution is uniform, right? So every number is equally likely to be chosen. However, that is not necessarily true for the actual choice behavior by humans. So it turns out a lot of people believe if they choose the birth date and the birth month of the relevant one and not themselves, they're more likely to win. But that is superstitious learning, right? It's not really the how that fair lottery game works. But that also suggests that the number between 1 and 31, they're overrated. And more importantly, number 32 to 48 is underrated. So let me be very clear. Choosing number greater than 31, like 32 to 48, will not enhance your chance of winning. But when you're lucky enough to win, you share with your others. That is how you can increase the expected payoff. So this example, of course, I'm not encouraging gambling. This is just a thought experiment. But this is really suggesting that, well, there's some opportunity may emerge from biases of others. So if others continue doing the superstitious behavior, choosing number of their birth month and birthday, sometimes it's futile to tell them they're wrong. They will not welcome these ideas, or kind of just telling them to be biased, right? Probably sometimes just can exploit this bias, make a fortune out of this from this approach. And one classic example people talk about for decades, of course, is Moneyball. So a lot of them have their biases, judging talent by the look. But this Billy Bean at the Oakland A tried to do the opposite, right? Tried to use data analytics to find this underdog, hiring them, and won a lot of gain by just having 1/3 of the payroll compared to, say, Yankees. But one overlooked behavioral consequence is that once this Moneyball story was made popular by Michael Lewis bestseller, a lot of other teams are copying their approach, the data analytics approach. So just within 3-4 years, then all these biases in the labor market inefficiency disappear. So the salary is much more corresponding, it's match all the contribution to winning by the players. So this kind of exploitation approach sounds like a little bit evil and not so nice, right? But it turns out to be a very good debiasing approach because it is effective. And a lot of biased people saw that. They will copy that. That is probably the more intuitive way or, nudging approach to fix all decades of this discrimination, biases, and so on and so forth.
What I love about this is, right, it's practical, but there's a glint in your eye as you're talking about it, right? Because this is like fun. This is a really fun way of sort of looking at the world and thinking about things differently. And I love that lottery example. I really like because all the things you pointed out, it's totally obvious, actually. Of course, if loads of people are using birthdays, so at 32, nobody's birthday will have that, and therefore you can, it starts, and Northland becomes a safer choice. And I just love this way because it's a much more fun way of looking at the world. And I think one of the things I rail against sort of conventional wisdom and best practice and all this stuff, LinkedIn is full of this stuff, right? Sort of this is how you do it. And I love the fact that you're presenting, I just know, it's just like it's way more interesting, way more engaging. And it feels to me like it will be much more fun to win your way than by slavishly following someone's prescribed ideas. It just seems really, really, it's counterintuitive, but it's human. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I do think so. I did enjoy my research program a lot. On the one hand, it's a luck, and on the other hand, it's really how to be this smart contrarian, right? But I think I need to highlight that being a contrarian is not enough because coming out with this deviant idea, a different from the conventional wisdom, is not that difficult. Any crazy idea can be considered contrarian, right? It's just like Christine said, kind of mixing always the chemical stuff in the water and drink it. That's a terrible idea. Most contrarian ideas are wrong. I think that is probably a very good statement to highlight a barrier to become a small contrarian, right? That's why in my current research, I already talk about a lot about how to be almost like operate like a scientist. So coming up with a contrarian idea, but then you need to translate that into a problem. What kind of problem you need to solve so that your contrarian belief can become true? And then testing this problem in terms of hypothesis, like a scientist collecting data. And that is really important because many people say you have a brilliant business idea, but there's no data to test it. But I would say that is a great opportunity because if you do have an idea, translate into a problem and a hypothesis, then you collect your own data, the unique data that no one else will have. That is, again, the look inward perspective, right? And then if your data analysis and all this verification approach suggests that your contrarian idea actually is viable, then good news that you're in the game. You're likely to monopolize that opportunity. But this approach also enables you to have a stopping rule. So when your contrarian belief is too crazy or the timing is not right, then you should stop, not pursuing that idea, even it may sound romantic, like Don Quixote, right? But it's just like too deviant to be realized for now. So I think that the smart contrarian approach is really consider coming up with a different idea, but also need to test it like a scientist. That is essential to be a smart contrarian.
That I find interesting because there's this phrase, FAFO, fuck around to find out, which is always used in a really negative way, which is sort of like, he's fucked around and found out, right? Look at what an idiot for doing. Now, of course, there are extreme examples of people doing stupid stuff. If I think back to certain, football competitions, we have people shoving flares up their backsides and doing just like dumb stuff, right? And there I would go, that is not the kind of experiment, to your point. But there is this bias against experimentation. And this is where I find if I look at social security models, in the US, there's a sort of, if you fail, well, you've had a go, you've tried, you've been entrepreneur. In Europe, you're a loser, a failure, whatever. We build the protections around to catch people to do that. But on the other hand, we sort of look at it and go, well, you would pushing your luck there a bit. So it seems to me that generally in society, and this may just be more of a European perspective, there's a reluctance to try things out, right? Seen as pushing the boundaries is seen as like in general context. I'm not talking about in the lab, but in general, it's seen as a negative thing. And I think, to your point, it's quite healthy to try new stuff, right? We should all be experimenting, trying different, whether that's different routes to work or there's something interesting about just testing stuff out and seeing what happens in a way that if you fail massively, it doesn't matter. But we seem to be biased against that. That goes against this narrative of success.
Yeah. I mean, that is a really profound question. There's a lot of boundary condition to my statement and also to that statement. I mean, walk around and find out, right? Because to the very basic level, that is what the animals doing. Think about how ants kind of find the food source of the sugar. Random walk is basically what they do. That equivalent to, fuck around, right? And then find out. Somehow they find out and leave all this trace so that the collective intelligence, meaning that then they follow this trace and the whole kind of ant population kind of exploit that source. So it suggests that humans should do better than that, not just like random walk, right? Because we have the capacity to learn. So if you have the random walk, most of the time you're not going to achieve anything. But the important thing is that whether you can learn from a mistake and accumulate your experience and knowledge in a constructive way, right? So if you only kind of fail fast, all this terminology, that will not be useful if you just fail and learn nothing. You need to learn more systematically. And I will argue, we talk about a lot of the perils of learning from success, right? And I also wrote about there's much more to learn from failures. And if you fail and you can learn from failures, definitely you'll be closer to your next success. And the approach I suggested actually can consider the combination approach, because the first part actually is come up with a interesting, unconventional, contrarian idea that is so different from the taking for granted. So that is actually the first step. You can think about it like maximizing the variance at that during that phase. But as we talk about, most novel ideas are bad ideas. So you need to know among all these possible contrarian ideas, which one deserve your more attention and deserve like working on that for 2-3 years to as a startup, for example. That is where this testing it as a scientist approach comes in. You need to reduce the variance and find the best among them. You need to have both to be a smart contrarian. If you only have one, that is not sufficient. Then you almost like rely on your own luck for the missing part, right?
I just love this. I know there's a ton of sophistication behind it, right? But you're very good at explaining it in really simple terms that make sense. But it also actually, I'm struck by it's simultaneously counterintuitive and yet very intuitive. And I'm sort of struggling to place it a little bit because my mind is you set fireworks off in my head, but on the other hand, I'm like, yeah, that actually makes a ton of sense. And so I'm struggling where to put this because you've like actually this like really, really powerful, beautifully explained. I'm very conscious at the time, but before I let you go, tell us a little bit about where's the research going to next? Because what's really interesting about this is that there are no bounds to this, right? You can keep going. There's tons of different angles on this. So where's your head at the moment, and what sort of the next bits you want to pursue?
Yeah. I mean, there's many research projects I have because I'm getting old, senior. I have a PhD student, so to pay attention to their project as well. But what always motivates me and kind of keep me going as a researcher is that, all this impact about luck, the surprising way, and how can you, increase your luck in an interesting way, right? So one of the current projects I have is there's a very interesting VC. The decision-making structure is so counterintuitive that if a project supported or endorsed by all 3 partners, or 2 out of 3, the majority vote, they're rejected. And they will invest on a startup if only 1 out of 3 partners is very passionate about that. So that we call a minority ruling. And we will show using mathematical model, what is the boundary condition when that works. So the idea actually is linking to this small contrarian idea pretty well, in the sense that, the goal of VC is to maximize the variance, right? It's not about the betting average. It's about the unicorn. I mean, having a unicorn, finding just one is sufficient for five years, for example. finding a lot of above average successful startup almost mean nothing. This really industry focus only on the variance. Then it turns out a lot of the usual thing we knew are affected, like majority ruling, consensus, is really bad if your goal is to maximize the variance. And in this case, minority ruling and combined with passion turns out to be a very useful guide to maximizing the variance. Of course, a lot of this rule the project selected will be bad ideas. It also increase the chance of finding the unicorn. So that is what's more important. Another very interesting twist here, probably Christine will be interested, that when we talk about human thinking and all this, sometimes we think emotion, passion is like the risk, right? It's not really systematic, not analytical. But here the example highlight, it depends on your goal. If your goal is to maximize the variance, actually always intuition, gut feeling, or passion can be a useful guide for your purpose. And that is what the VC case told us.
That is absolutely astonishing. And yeah, again, you've just done it again. I sort of think about it and go, well, I could put logical arguments around it as well to sort of say, okay, so you've got one person that's really backing this, they're staking their reputation on it, right? It's there, so they're gonna to the extent that they will be influencing the business, they've got to keep an eye on it, right? Because nobody else wanted to do this thing. So you could sort of say that actually, from a not just from a sort of the dynamics you talked about, but just in the sort of terms of the managing the investment, it kind of makes sense, right? That you're going to be the one because I'm not taking care of this. You should take care of this, right? Because you thought it was a good idea. You own this. So I love the whole. There's a whole load of other human dynamics off the back of it. What a brilliant idea. And I love the fact that firstly, they've come up with this structure, right? Which I think is quite courageous and interesting, but clever. And then you've just gone, hey, let's see what's going on here. Right. Like you're sort of backfilling I don't want to say logic, but you're making sense of it all. And so I love that. I think that's like the perfect, here's an interesting thing. Let's go find out how this works. Whether it works and what the dynamics underpin it. I love it. We need more academics like you doing that. That's just super. Because I think I'm motivated by, and I keep coming back to me as the small child, right, who would point at stuff and go, "What's that?" And typically in a way that would embarrass my parents, right? I'd point at other people, right? I go, "Why is he that?" You know, that sort of embarrassing. But they indulged it, and I think for me, people that help me to understand the world are incredibly valuable because that's what motivates me to sort of wander around and look at things and spend time on things and focus and whatever. And so I love the fact that you exist. So I want to say, number one, thank you just for existing and doing what you do and approaching it in such a brilliant way. Secondly, for writing, the book is fantastic. I loved it. I wish I had discovered it years ago, but better late than never. And I'm now all over the stuff that you're putting out there. So I'll put links to all of those things there. But above all, thank you for absolutely blowing my mind and being for a guest on the show.
Thank you so much for reaching out. I enjoyed the conversation a lot. Definitely, you deserve a lot of credit, right? Because asking always important and profound question that trigger a lot of my thinking. So we jointly create our own luck, I would say.
I love that, Chengwei. Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Thank you.
So that's it for this episode of the show. My enormous thanks to you for listening and to Chengwei for appearing. To find out more about Chengwei, his book on luck, and a whole load of other things, have a look in the show notes. There are links to those there. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk podcast, thank you so much for joining me. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. If you're a long-time listener of the show and you love it, then please do consider leaving a review or even just a rating on whichever platform you're listening to this on. It really helps other people to discover the show. To discover episodes of the show that you might have missed, visit the show's website, which is humanriskpodcast.com. I will be back very soon with another episode of the show, but in the meantime, stay safe. And why not try something new today? Take a small risk, embrace uncertainty, and see what kind of luck and serendipity you might uncover. But above all, thank you so much for listening.